here. That way I can pick it up on the live stream. So thank you all for coming, and I think there's some more people watching online. But we are very glad to have Jenna Londgren here for what we hope to be a series of workshops and enrichment presentations for families here at Faith. Throughout the course of the summer, we're entitling it the Flourishing Family series. But this is our first one, entitled Self-Care for Parents. I've known Jenna from college, and so it's great to see you again. But she is she's an assistant professor and coordinator of alcohol and drug studies at Minnesota State University Mankato. And she's a counselor at Christian Family Services. I believe that's correct. And she is a mother of 3 children and a wife. And so we are glad to have her here with us again today. And Jenna, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks for being here.
All right, sounds great. Thank you so much, Pastor Hendricks. And thank you all for coming. I know that it's a big commitment to spend a beautiful Saturday morning inside in church. So I just really appreciate, this opportunity to be with you today and just you taking the time to be here because this topic is just so important. And also thank you to Faith Lutheran for just investing in this topic. As Pastor Hendricks said, I'm a professor, and what I do in Mankato at MSU is I teach my students how to become counselors to work with people with addiction. And that's really kind of how my interest and my expertise in this topic developed, because it's a really challenging field. And along with that, I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist and a nationally certified counselor. And I've been working with Christian Family Solutions for about 7 years. And if you haven't heard of Christian Family, it's just this awesome company that's based out of Germantown, Wisconsin. And we work primarily with ELS and WELS members, and it's just a fantastic organization. One of my biggest passions is supporting people who are struggling, especially Christians. So I just feel very blessed to have that opportunity. So I'll tell you a little bit kind of my relationship to this topic and how I got interested in this, and then really why it's so necessary right now. And then what I'm really gonna do is I'm not gonna tell you to work out, have hobbies, eat better, kind of do take a bath. I think a lot of times if you talk about self-care, it's like, here's all of these things that I'm gonna add to your plate. So that's not what I'm gonna do today at all. I feel like a lot of our plates are full, they're probably bursting, and I don't wanna make you feel overwhelmed by this topic. But what I've really done is I've kind of analyzed different patterns that I've noticed, whether it's in the research or in my work as a counselor, in my work with students, in my personal life. And I've kind of summarized 5 different patterns that people engage in that are detrimental to our mental health. So I'm gonna outline those patterns, and then I'm gonna give kind of a strategy that you can use to break that pattern and ultimately hopefully lead you to more peace, joy, comfort, certainty, just having some sort of emotional resource so we don't feel exhausted and burnt out all the time. So that's just kind of what to expect today. So I don't want you to be overwhelmed by this topic and feel like you need to get your act together because I know a lot of people are struggling. So a little bit before I get into this, but I just really got into this topic. I've been at MSU and I teach people how to become a counselor, specifically with addiction. It's really hard. It's really hard to work with addiction. If any of you know people who struggle with addiction in your life, it is one of the most challenging topics. You feel very hopeless and out of control a lot of the time. So I'm training, these 20, 21-year-old students, and they are just burning out. They're just getting so overwhelmed, they can't do it. So I really thought, what can I be teaching these students that are gonna help them become more resilient emotionally? How can they deal with so much trauma and tragedy in the lives of their clients? How can they have some resources to be able to cope? So that's really when I started digging into the research and trying to find everything I could to help people. How do people become emotionally resilient? That's what the question that really geared me to researching this. And then around the same time, I had my 3rd baby and I was kind of getting ready to go back to work. And I was just feeling really overwhelmed. I think I had a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old and then a newborn. and then just seeing clients and running this big growing program that's tripled since I've been there, I was just feeling anxious and I was feeling dread. So not only is it like, what does the research say about this topic, but what can I take from this? How can I apply this? Because I don't want to feel in survival mode my whole life. Like if I'm going to be supporting other people, what do I need to stay positive and joyful and to not feel dread all the time? And that's really how this presentation was born. So it just has great meaning to me personally and professionally. And what the other interesting piece about the timing of this is that this was all pre-COVID. So I had this presentation prior to a global pandemic hitting, which was also really good timing. So I've just had this awesome opportunity to be able to share this presentation to a variety of groups. I've shared it to teachers, a lot of educators. I've shared it at Mount Olive in Mankato to the parents there, and a lot of other mental health people and higher educators, and I've shared it at MLC and Bethany both. So it's just been a really important topic right now. So why is this topic important? I think if you go on Facebook and look for 2 seconds at the news feed, you will see why it's important that we take care of ourselves, because the world is struggling, not only with COVID, but also just with a lot of political and societal unrest. That people are just suffering, people are angry, there's a lot of conflict going on. So just life as we know it has shifted completely. And this isn't news to you, you all know this. The other thing that makes this really unique is that we know what's going on. You cannot get away from the headlines and the updates and the, everyone's opinion about it too. So just, 10 years ago, it's not like you had the news in your pocket all the time and everyone's opinion on it. And, headlines aren't designed to help us feel good. They're designed to strike our fear so we read on. So everything in the news isn't like, it's going to be a great day today. It's beautiful out. Because you wouldn't read on. You'd say, great, that sounds good. They're like, 10 more people die of COVID. Your kids are next. And you're like, what? I need to read on. Why is this going to happen? So it's designed to strike fear in our hearts because fear needs an answer. We don't like ambiguity, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So the other thing that's unique about this pandemic that's different from other tragedies that we've faced as a nation is that historically, if there's been a school shooting, a war, any sort of problem as a community, how we heal is that we come together, right? Whether it's by praying together, singing together, rallying, we hug and we cry and we comfort each other. So we heal together. And what's so unique about this pandemic is that the togetherness is the threat, that other people are the actual threat. And how God made us is that we are relational community beings, and that being together is one of the most necessary things for our happiness and mental health. And the very core of this is that other people equal threat, other people equal contamination, exposure, conflict about it as well. So now you don't know if people are comfortable hugging you or shaking your hand, or if they would wear a mask or don't wear a mask, and if they're in their home, what are they comfortable with? And that sort of conflict is really damaging to our health. So I think the other thing that's really unique about this is just all of these kind of questions. What's it going to be like? What's it going to be like for our kids, for education, for the job market? And we just sort of don't know. And I think what all of this leads to is distress and feeling overwhelmed and feeling kind of out of control. And it's not that we've ever had control, but it's more apparent now than ever. So the first thing that I really want to point out is just the definition, because I think sometimes we use self-care maybe as an excuse, right? Like, I just watched TV for 4 hours, but I was taking care of myself. Or, oh, I just spent, $45 on a manicure, but self-care. Which again, that's okay to do that. It's okay to self-indulge, but that's a little bit different than self-care. So when I ask my students too, like, what do you do for self-care? They'll say, I just watch TikTok videos, for several hours at a time, or I just binge watch a Netflix series. Once again, that's fine. It's called coping, right? If we're kind of coping with how we feel. It's okay to do that. But self-care is a little bit different, and that's what I want to point out, just so we're clear on our definition. So what self-care is, this is really the practice of taking action to preserve or improve your health. So I think a few things about that. This isn't kind of a way to rationalize behavior, and it's very intentional. That's what I want to point out. So you have an outcome in mind. If you stare at your phone or look at your fantasy football or, stare at the TV, that's one thing. But that's not kind of an active strategy to take care of your health. So I, just being the weird nerd academic that I am, I wanted to I researched what the definition is, and then I kind of put it all together. And this is what I came up with. So it's a process of intentionally developing and executing strategies that improve your mental, emotional, physical, relational, and spiritual health. So a few other things that I just want to point out about this definition is that this is a process. That what you did for self-care in college or when you were growing up or before COVID or before you became a parent, that's different than what your needs are now. That we're human beings and our needs ebb and flow based on what's happening for us. So I work with a lot of clients who say, what I used to do doesn't work anymore. Like what I do to take care of myself just isn't doing it for me anymore. And that's okay. This is a process. It's fluid. It's going to ebb and flow as your needs change. And it's okay to kind of be open to it as a process, not like I go on walks to take care of myself and that's my only thing that I do. Or I do a devotional, and when that doesn't work, I'm out of tools, I'm out of ideas. So the other thing about it, once again, is that it's really intentional. So like I said, it's not just about, self-indulgence or rationalizing behavior. And like I said, it's okay to do that once in a while, and you can have self-compassion for yourself if you do stay up late eating ice cream and watching TV. But just to kind of differentiate that from intentional self-care. And the other last thing that I'll point out is these are various determinants of health. So it's not just about spiritual self-care. It's not just about physical self-care. I think a lot of times it's like, I need to work out and eat better. I should take care of myself better. But it's about all of these areas. So we're not just physical beings. We're not just spiritual beings. We're all of these things. So what I want you to do as I'm talking is I just want you to kind of start to be applying this to yourself. So if you're like, I would like to take a better spiritual care of myself, what can I do that would enhance my spiritual health? Or I do want to take better care of myself physically because I just feel exhausted all the time. What can I do to feel more energy, feel more vitality? What are ways that I can start to apply this? Because all of this is kind of broad, but I want you to make it fit for you. Because I don't know your exact needs, and I don't know exactly where you want to, improve these various determinants. So make it fit for you. All right. The other thing that I want to talk about, just why don't we do it? Right? We all know we should take better care of ourselves. So why don't we? And it's just kind of with any goal that we have, anything that we want to be doing that we're not, what is our barrier? I think it's just really important to kind of outline what are the things that get in our way for us accomplishing anything we want to accomplish, not just self-care, but anything. So I'm going to kind of walk through these different barriers that get in our way. And again, I want you to kind of apply this to yourself and really think about which ones you relate to the most. And I like this quote. I think a lot of times once we're exhausted, once we're panicking, once we are feeling really hopeless, we're like, I need to intervene, right? But I don't want it to be like that. I want you to develop these resources to prevent those breakdowns and those times of suffering. So we're going to make it our steering wheel instead of our spare tire, because I think that's kind of our model that we use now. All right, so these are the barriers, and I'm going to kind of walk you through them. The first barrier is just strategy. What system do you have in place for executing whatever it is you want to be doing? This is kind of the nuts and bolts of habits. This is the nuts and bolts of your process. So for example, if you say to yourself, I want to do a devotion every day, but I'm just going to see how I feel. and if it happens, it happens. Chances are it's not going to happen, right? So if your strategy is, I'll just see how I feel, and if I remember, then I'll try to do that. What they really find is that if you schedule something, it's much more likely to happen, right? If you say, I'll just go to the doctor sometime, you don't go as likely as if you actually schedule it. It seems very obvious, but when you think about it, it does make a lot of sense. So it's just like that with the things that we want to be doing, the things we want to be adding. So if you say, I'm going to wake up 10 minutes earlier, I want to do a devotion at my kitchen table with a little journal next to me and a cup of coffee. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my alarm, I'm going to clear off my table, I'm going to get my coffee so I can brew it with one click of a button, and I'm going to have my devotional ready. That is a better strategy than seeing how you feel, right? So strategy is very solution-focused. What are ways that I can make this happen? If I want to start going on walks, when am I going to do it? Who am I going to do it with? What am I going to wear? What's my route? And, what am I going to do if I start to have an excuse for myself? Maybe who can hold me accountable? So that is strategy. It's a system that you have in place to make your goals happen. To be honest, I think strategy is the easiest one to solve. You can Google it, right? This is like, hey, how do I make the thing that I want to do happen? Solve it. You can figure that out. The other two are the ones that hold us back the most, okay? Because these are our subconscious. We don't know that we're engaging in these. We don't make this direct link. Like all of us, if we want to be running, but we don't have running shoes, we hate running, and we never want to do it, those are all barriers. So it is more about what can I do that's fun, what's likely, and it's making a decision, right? Okay, so state is your physiology. This is your physical body, how you're feeling, your energy levels, just kind of what's going on for your body, okay? So are you exhausted all the time? Are you overwhelmed all the time? Are you angry? Are you manic? Are you sad and crying? Are you panicking? Are you energized and joyful and have tons of motivation? Those are your states. So your state is a big barrier. If you want to run and you're feeling exhausted and tired and overwhelmed, that's going to be a barrier because you don't feel like doing it. And I'm going to talk more about ways that we can change our state because we absolutely have power over that. But I would say state is one thing. I think what a lot of people are experiencing is just lack of motivation, exhaustion, I work with college students in April right now. Everyone is feeling that I work with probably 300 college students across my classes. Just the work that I'm getting in, the excuses, and overall just this lack of motivation. They're just overwhelmed, exhausted, just done. So state is a barrier. If you're exhausted, you're not going to execute because your energy is going towards managing your mood and how you feel. So I'm going to talk more about kind of ways to deal with that, but that's a barrier. So in some ways, it's asking yourself, what are ways when do I have my best energy? And there's a lot of science behind this too, that they say your energy decreases throughout the day, your cognitive functioning decreases throughout the day. So in the morning is your best cognitive, rational, problem-solving time. Afternoon is more kind of paperwork, busy work almost, that's a little bit more mindless. And in the evening is your idea, your big picture thinking, kind of that sort of, you're in that cognitive state. So sometimes it's like, when do I feel the most energized? What states am I in? And how can I design my day so I'm most effective based on my state? And then I'll talk, like I said, about other ways that we can change that. I would say the biggest barrier that we face is our story. Okay, and this is our belief system. This is our belief system that gives us limitations, that gives us parameters, that gives us beliefs about what we are capable of, what we can afford, what we have time for, what someone in our life stage should or shouldn't be doing. These are all of the stories that we create about we as people and what we're capable of. So the stories that we make up could be, I can't afford that, this is selfish to do that, I don't have the time for this, I don't have the time to take care of myself because I'm already booked as it is, so I'm not going to do that. It's too much. I think, too, it's just really about like our identity as well. And that's one of our biggest predictors of our habits is how we identify. So if you're like, I'm just a messy person, I just leave my clothes everywhere, and I just never clean up because I'm messy. It's who I am. We're much more likely to engage in those habits. I'm just a bad driver, right? Or I'm a smoker. I'm a smoker, so I smoke. So our identities are great predictors of our habits and our behavior. And I just think that's really fascinating. So once you know that, then you can really examine like how do you identify and how does that predict your behavior and what are ways you can change it? Because it's just made up, right? It's how we identify. If you're like, I'm indoorsy or I'm not an athlete, it's like, why not? Who says you can't be an athlete, right? Who says you can't be healthy? So really examining the stories that we've created and how those hold us back. And I'll share one that I kind of uncovered about myself. Once again, these are very subconscious. Like a lot of times you don't even know that this is a belief that you have. So one thing that I have never solved very well until this year is I've never been able to exercise. Like I did sports in high school, I kind of lost that in college, and then I was in college for 10 years solid getting my doctorate. So I was just in school. So we've had 3 kids pretty quickly. So being a working mom, I've just thought like, I can't work out. Like that's super selfish. I can't like leave my family again. Like I'm booked as it is. So the story that I made up was like a working mom can't work out because that's selfish, essentially. Once again, that's not true. Like no one told me that. It's just something that I made up that held me back. So I had never been able to work out, and I was just like, why can't I figure this out? So once I actually like kind of put my finger that this was a belief for me, and it's like, wait a second. My husband would never say that. He would encourage me to, and we all know that working out is awesome for us. It's necessary for our health. They say the benefits of working out, if you could encapsulate that into a pill, it would be the best-selling antidepressant and anti-anxiety med of all time. 20 minutes a day of brisk walking, probably 5 days a week. So once again, it's the logic, the strategies are all there. It's the stories that hold us back. Once I uncovered that, I started walking at my job. I walk on the treadmill at the university where I work, and like problem solved. It takes me 20 minutes. That's kind of what I do. So it was never the strategy that was the problem. It was the story. So if you can really think about what do you believe about yourself, about someone in your position, about someone in your life stage, about someone with your resources, and what are ways that you can break through that, because it's possible. And all of, these can kind of come from childhood as well, about just you as a person and your identity. And like I said, I think breaking through those, it's just so empowering. So these are some examples of the beliefs that just even about this topic is like, I don't have time. Like I can't do anything else. Like don't make me, no. Once again, if you look at your time and you like logically lay it out, I'm guessing we could find time. Just too tired, the thought overwhelms me, it's selfish. I think that's that a lot of us might hold on to, like, I can't do that, what? I remember one time I was really tired, I'm just so tired. My husband's like, why don't you take a nap? And I was like, what? I can't even believe that that's an option for me. It's just weird, like very solution focused, but it's like, I can't do that. And it's like, yes, you can. The other thing too is this idea that you'll do it eventually. In the trans-theoretical model of change, if you've ever studied that, it's like all the different stages of change, right? Pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action. It's kind of like this pre-contemplation. I'll do that down the road. Like I'll be healthier in summer. Once school ends, I'll do this. Once my kids graduate, once they move out of the house, when the kids are older, it's kind of like pushing it off so you don't have to deal with it now. I think that's one that a lot of us engage in, of like, I'll do it down the road. So once again, just kind of study these beliefs, look at which ones resonate with you. Which ones kind of hold you back, whether it's this is too expensive, it's not a good use of time, and just really look at how is it a barrier for you? And what's a new belief that you can replace this with, right? Like it's important that I take care of myself. It matters that I'm functioning at my highest. Because I passionately believe that especially if Christians are thriving, if Christians are joyful, if we're the ones that are certain right now, like this is a way for the gospel to be spread. So why does it matter that you take care of yourself? Because this is part of who we are as Christians. And this is greater than us, right? So kind of strategies and states, like I said, staying in this contemplation stage. The other thing is just not deciding. I think a lot of times if we decide something, all of a sudden our energy goes there, our brain power goes there, and we make it happen. So if you don't decide it, it doesn't happen. But if you say, I'm going to run a 5K, I'm running this Halloween 5K, I'm doing it, then all of a sudden you're much more likely to do that as well. So sometimes it just takes a decision, and then it happens as well. The other thing that I can't say enough is just technology. Technology is a barrier to everything, in my very old school opinion. But I just think the amount of time that we spend mindlessly looking at our phone, on social media sites, reading the news, playing video games, playing computer games, it's a barrier to other intentional wellness activities. And I think it just becomes so addicting and so habitual. Like how many times are you in the waiting room at the doctor and you just look at your phone, right? Or if you are just sitting anytime having free time and you just pull your phone out and like, oh, I need to check in with my friends. I need to check in with the scoop. So I just think that just kind of mindless, that's hours a day. That's so much time. And just kind of, it's not bad to use it, but just being super intentional. So setting a timer so you don't just go down the rabbit hole and then suddenly come to and you're looking at your coworker's cousin's daughter's baptism. You're like, how did I get here? Like, what is happening when you come back to life? Oh, we can all relate. Okay, so those are the barriers. So once again, analyze which ones fit with you the most. If it's your strategy, and that talk about it with other people. Say, you know what, I want to start doing this. I want to start cooking at home more. Like, what are ways I can do that? What are, ingredients that I can use? How can I make this fun? That's the other thing that's really important. All of this has to be fun for us. If it's stressful, if it's a burden, if it's something that you're like, ugh, I should cook at home more, I should budget, I should work out, it's not fun. We don't want to do unfun stuff. Again, I work with addiction. We do what feels good. That is how we are wired, right? Like we go for pleasure, we avoid pain. That's how we survive, and that's what, our sinful nature wants as well. So if you can make this fun and exciting, you know what? Why does it matter that I'm healthy and feel better? Because that would be good. That would be good for me, and I want to feel like that. Not like, ugh, let me think of all the ways that I'm avoiding this. So why would it be cool to cook at home? Because it's delicious, and let's use some fun ingredients and go to the farmer's market and make it like a really fun, fresh meal. And then invite other people and, kind of make it exciting for you, and you'll be much more likely to do it. Okay, so like I promised, what I've done is I've really analyzed and looked at some patterns that I've noticed that lead to suffering, essentially, at the core, that lead to detriments in our mental health, that lead to anxiety, depression, panic, feeling just really worn out and stressed out. So the first one is very simple, but it's just asking stressful questions. So one thing to understand about our brain is that our brain is really designed to help us survive, okay? It's not designed to make us happy. So what we do as humans is that we have experiences, and when they're threatening, when they're sad, when they're hard, our brain stores that. And if we're reminded of that in our present day, our brain is going to be like, oh, that reminds you of your 7th grade teacher. They were really mean to you. Watch out. Or, oh, you've been cheated on. Your partner is acting distant. I think that they're up to something. So your brain is always looking for ways to help you survive. So it releases this chemical called cortisol. That's our stress chemical, because it reminds you of times that you've been in danger or that you've been threatened. One thing that our brain does not like is ambiguity, because that, at the core, is dangerous to our survival, because we need to know what's going to happen. And the news plays on this neurobiology, like I said. So we need to know an answer to something. So why this matters to this detriment is that if you ask your brain a bad question, it's going to give you an answer no matter what, okay? Even if it's a terrible answer that's not logical or rational. And I think a lot of people through COVID and just in general, we ask really bad questions. We say, when is this going to end? Why is this happening? What did I do to deserve this? Why is everyone crazy right now? Why does no one notice how hard I work? Why don't you care about me? And I think this becomes dangerous when especially younger people says, who would care if I died? No, who would care? And then your brain says, well, your dad ignored you, so he wouldn't care. Your mom didn't ask how your day was, so she didn't care. And this is what I said, this is when it gets dangerous, especially for the younger generations that we're facing a suicide epidemic right now as well. So when we ask a bad question, we get a bad answer, period. So our first self-care strategy is ask yourself better questions. And this seems so simple. This seems so, just really simple. But if you really start to notice your thought patterns, if you start to notice in conversations the questions people are asking, you start to see some red flags in our thought processes, essentially. I think one that I had last fall, I taught a super overload. I was in person. I'm just I am white knuckling through a pandemic, and it matters to the students. But no one else was there. I was the only person on campus, and I would get really frustrated. And I remember thinking, why am I the only one that cares? Okay, it's not a good question. That's not true. That's very I'm a martyr. I'm the only one that cares. Why am I the only one that cares? And then from there, you can see how that snowballs. No one appreciates me. Blah blah blah. So first strategy is ask yourself better questions. So depending on any problem that you have, literally any problem, anything from your past that you're struggling with, if you can turn it into a better question, if you can turn it into a different meaning, this is going to change your outcome completely. So if you're struggling with anxiety, you can say, how am I feeling? What do I need right now? Where is my anxiety guiding me? How am I strengthening my faith through this? What are ways that I can improve my mental health? What are ways that I can learn from this? How can I use this to teach my children different strategies? How can I use this to connect with my students? How can I use this to help me grow kinder and more compassionate? How can I use this to better myself? So instead, if you're struggling with anxiety and you say, why do I always feel like this? What's wrong with me? Why is this so hard for me? Why can everyone else figure things out and I can't? If you say, what are my emotions guiding me towards? Because your emotions are guides. They're not wrong. They're not burdens. They're guides that lead you to different outcomes, right? Whether it's rest, whether it's connection, whether it is, a different strategy at work or something else. They're guides that are giving you information. And this is what I talk about with all of my clients, and a lot of them struggle with anxiety. Okay, so how do you feel, and what do you need, and who can support you, and kind of asking just this different set of questions. So when COVID hit, I had this strategy, and I'm okay, how do we make this the best thing that's ever happened to us, right? If you can ask yourself a question like that, think of the answers you can get. And I use this with my clients too, and I've used this in some pretty powerful ways. I worked with someone whose significant other tried to murder her, and it was a very, very serious thing, and he stabbed her in the throat. Really unexpected, and she had a lot of her vocal cords were damaged, and she couldn't talk very well. She was a licensed medical professional, really highly just a really educated, competent professional. And after that happened, she couldn't talk very well, and it was hard to understand her. And in my work with her, she just said, like, if my patients worked with me, they'd say, you're the one that needs help. And what I did in my work with her is I said, once we had gotten to a specific place, I said, how do you use this as your superpower? How do you make this the best thing that's ever happened to you? And she really said, instead of saying, like, what am I going to do? Why did this happen? How did I not see these red flags or whatever else? She's like, once I thought of it like that, if you think about the resilience and survival and the power in that experience, all of a sudden it changes your life. So once again, don't use this if someone's experienced a tragedy and you say, how do you use this as the best thing that's ever happened to you? Like, it takes some timing that's appropriate. It takes some processing. But ultimately, kind of the process through understanding any tragedy is creating a meaning of it. And the meaning is in your power. It can be a breakdown or it can be a breakthrough. It all depends on what it means to you. Is your life over, or is this a new beginning? And again, that's the power of just asking better questions. So one real life case study that I talk about when I do this presentation, and it's a really powerful story. It happened to a man in Vietnam. So he was a pilot, and he was shot down with 2 of his comrades, and he was held prisoner of war in one of the most notorious prison camps in Vietnam. And this is a true story. So it's 3 Americans held as prisoners of war in just very, very dire conditions. So a really small cell, I think it was like 4 by 6, really small cell. There's nothing to meet his basic needs except for a hole in the ground. Routinely tortured, completely isolated, living on very small rations. No idea when you're going to get out. That's the reality of their situation. So one of them immediately killed himself in the cell. He hung himself. He's like, I'm not going to go through this. The second one ended up getting out, and he went crazy. He actually went insane. So he was institutionalized for several decades after coming back to America. And then Jerry was the third one. And this really kind of demonstrates how the power of the question that he asked himself completely changed his outcome. So he assesses his situation, and he says, you know what, like, I'm going to be here a while. So the question that he asked was, how do I use this? How do I use this? Okay, so he had 3 solutions. The first one is that he activated his body. So he physically, worked out the best he could. He did sit-ups, jumping jacks, wall sits, push-ups. So he stayed physically fit. The second thing that he did is that he talked to God. So he strengthened his relationship with God because he said he had no one else to talk to. So he prayed and he, just strengthened that relationship. And then the last thing that he did is that he thought through every single day of his life. So he went back in his mind and walked through every moment of every day of his life that he could remember. And he just thought through it moment by moment. And then at the end of the day, he said, what did I learn from this? And that's how he stimulated his mind. Growth mindset. He was there for 7 years of this. So he got out after 7 years. He said it's the most powerful experience of his life. He's stronger physically, spiritually, and mentally more than he's ever been in his life. He ended up writing a book about it called Beyond Survival. But if you think about the external circumstances of all 3 of those men, they're in the same external circumstances. There's no difference. They're all in a cell. They're all prisoners of war. They're all isolated, beaten, starved. And think of the difference in the outcome. So it's asking yourself a better question is going to change everything. And it's true, because it's not about our external circumstances. It never has been. It's really about the questions we ask ourselves, the meaning that we make of things, and ultimately how we communicate to ourselves. So like I said, if you can think of any problem that you have and just turn it into a better question, even if it's how do I use this, right? Like I think that's a really good question, especially how do I use this to help others? Because then it gives your problem, your tragedy, your pain a greater meaning than just yourself. All right, the second detriment that I'm going to cover is complaining. And people don't like it when I cover this because they want to hold on to their complaining. It feels so good, it lets it out. We can just, lament about the craziness of the world with other people. So people complain a lot. Like I said, if you go on Facebook, if you go on social media, you hear everyone's problems, everyone's opinions, all the stuff that's wrong with everything, and it's not good for us, okay? So I'm gonna walk you through this. I'm not gonna take it away completely, because the goal is not paste a smile on your face and pretend like everything's okay. Like that's not what I'm advocating for. But let's just talk about this. Okay. So the first thing to understand is that negativity is contagious. So the more that you're exposed to it, the more negative you become. It's also one of the ways that we're wired as community beings, that we adapt to the people that we're around. So if people in your life are really negative, pessimistic, you adapt to that, because fighting that, isn't natural, essentially. So complaining also releases cortisol. That's our stress hormone. And what cortisol does in our brain is that this puts us into fight or flight mode. This puts us into survival mode. So when you're upset, when you're stressed, when you're angry, when you complain, cortisol is released. And what cortisol does is this shuts off every part of our system that's not necessary for survival. So kind of at the core of it, if you meet a predator in the woods, if you meet a grizzly bear, you don't have access to anything but fight, flight, freeze. You run, you fight it, or you freeze, which I'd probably run. But what it does, once again, is that you literally can't access these other systems of your brain. And your non-necessary survival functions include empathy, creativity, compassion, long-term memory. That's why if you're in a fight with a spouse, you can't remember why you married them. You can't. You don't have access to that. I'm serious. This is neurobiological. You also can't critically problem solve or long-term plan. All of that access of your prefrontal cortex is shut off. It's fight or flight. So that's what cortisol does. It does not make us our best selves. And when we're around negativity, cortisol is released. The other thing, I want to tell you about a study. Okay, so they did this study out of Stanford, and they had two groups of people. And one group, they said, tell me about a time you've been wronged or slighted. The other group, they said, just tell me about a time you were bored, okay? The two groups of people. And the real part of the study is that what they did next is that they asked for a favor from these participants. So they wanted to look at which group is more likely to help, which group is more likely to help the researchers. And you can kind of guess, the ones who talked about the times that they were wronged or slighted, they were 24% less likely to help the researchers with a simple favor. They also were more likely to leave garbage behind, and they were more likely to steal the researchers' pens. So what they found from this study is that being in a victim mentality makes us selfish, less generous, and pen thieves, apparently. It literally makes us entitled. And all of you can think of times when you're upset and then someone's like, oh, can you do this thing? And you're like, no. I am not helping anyone else. I am not doing that. This happens if I'm upset at work. And they're like, oh, can you do a committee? I'm like, no, I'm not helping out anymore, right? Because we're entitled and we're selfish. And that's what complaining leads us to. So it does not help us be generous, compassionate, empathetic, kind of all the things the world needs right now. So one thing that I do want to point out, I'll talk about kind of the anecdote to this, but it's very important to talk about how you feel. It's very important to specifically describe your emotions and to not just run from them or stuff them or repress them or shame yourself for how you feel. It's important to be assertive if you're upset. I'm not saying to stuff that or just, it doesn't matter how you feel because you're being negative. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's important to talk about the things that you're frustrated by very assertively. But what I'm saying is don't stay there and don't snowball there and don't let that be the way that you connect with other people. Because I think at a lot of workplaces, it's just like, let's talk about how our boss and the government and administration and all these people are, wronging us, because that's not going to be healthy. There's also been another study. They said that it literally damages your brain. Just 30 minutes of exposure to complaining, and that includes the news and Facebook. It damages parts of your brain called the hippocampus, which is necessary for long-term memory and things like that. All right, so our second strategy is guarding your mind. And I think that this is so important, especially for younger people, especially for, I'd say kids to young adults to adolescents, but everyone now. Like if you look at the usage of smartphones, it's not just by young people, right? Like my grandma's 92 and she's on Facebook, she's on Marco Polo. She always pressures me, which, I do like Marco Polo because that's one that you can send little videos, but it's not just young people who are glued to their phones all the time. So really, really being intentional with what you are feeding your mind, where your conversations go, the people you're spending time with, the music you're listening to, all of this impacts how we feel. So if you're on social media all day, reading the news, talking about COVID, talking about other problems, you're not going to feel good. You're going to feel depressed and hopeless and anxious. If you, are in your devotions talking about ways that you can be a better parent or person, serving other people, talking about what's inspiring you, that's going to make you feel differently. And I do, when I get together, I'm like, what's inspiring you guys right now? Those are my conversation starters. That's what I want to hear about. I don't want to hear about your opinions about X, Y, Z, right? So the other thing, too, is just about setting boundaries. So if a conversation is going there, it's not about saying, you're being negative, I don't want to damage my brain. You can still validate people in your life, right? You can still listen. Because that's what I get a lot of questions about. If you can't complain, what if people are complaining to you? What do you do with that? So I think it's important to listen and validate, but it's not to say, oh my gosh, you're right, and here's what's happened to me, and here's what I saw, blah, blah, blah. It's just saying, yeah, this is really tough. This is really frustrating. So what do you think? What can we do about it? How can we, blah, blah, ask a better question. So don't join that. Don't stay there. And don't expose yourself to it if possible. So I did quote my mom here. She always said garbage in, garbage out, right? And my parents were always really good about, not letting us watch anything on TV and not letting us watch any movies. And I used to sneak talk shows after school. And my mom would say that. I watched Maury and, all those trashy shows. But it's true. If we drink poison, if we're exposed to things like poison in our body, we're going to get sick. And if we're listening to poison and consuming it in our minds are going to get sick. And that's just what we're seeing, is that people are sort of sicker than ever. All right, this is another one of my favorite ones that I've really been just intentional about for myself and just really managing. Okay, so expectations. All of us have them. We have ideas about just how other people should be, how the world should be, how the government should be. We have ideas about how people should drive, how other people should treat us, how our kids should act. We have a lot of expectations. We have expectations for ourselves as well, right? Maybe really high expectations. And if you really if you put your happiness in how you expect your kids to act, if you put your happiness in how you expect the government to act, if you put your happiness in how you expect other people to drive, if you put your happiness in how you expect your spouse to act, or even yourself, like you are in for a world of frustration and disappointment and resentment. And I think a lot of us experience this. And I heard this quote that said, frustration is a matter of expectation. So it's really, if you are frustrated about something, like what are your expectations about it? If you're mad that your 4-year-old is not listening, like what are your expectations? Do you expect your child to listen to you every time you redirect them? You know, do you expect your boss to like take your needs into consideration every time they give a project? Do you expect your spouse to empty the dishwasher every time they're home and to have dinner waiting? Like, yes, I do, but but once again, analyzing these expectations. In February, I flew to South Carolina, and I went with my sister, and both of us have 3 kids, and no kids were coming, and I was like over the moon. And we flew into Chicago. She's from De Pere, Wisconsin, so I was flying by myself. She was flying with a group, but we got delayed. Our flight got delayed. So once again, I'm flying by myself. It's the first time traveling in forever, and I was just like so grateful and excited and happy. Flight got delayed. I'm like, it doesn't matter. I have nothing to do. I have no one with me. I have no kids. Like, I'm just so happy to be in this position. Like, I don't care whatever happens. The other people on the plane whose flight got delayed were not in the same mind space. The amount of F words and swearing and frustration, and like, it's February in the Midwest. It's a snowstorm in Chicago. Like, you know, what do you expect? I hate to say that. Every time you fly, what do you expect? It's like, if you are just, I don't know, it's again about this mindset that if it's like, my plane must be on time and the weather must cooperate with me, and if it doesn't, I'm gonna swear at the flight attendants. Again, you're bound to suffer because the world will not go how you expect it to. So the anecdote to this is appreciation. And I think appreciation and gratitude are talked about quite a bit. But I want to give you some more information about it that hopefully will help you see it in a different way. So one quote that I've heard is to change your expectations into appreciation. And it sounds cheesy and it sounds flaky, but if you really, really try to have this be your mindset and for this to be your framework instead of what are all the ways that everyone is letting me down all the time, you know, first of all, just being in awe of the miracle that you're alive right now and being in awe of the miracle that your brain works and that your heart works, because if those don't work, you don't work. Just being in awe of, you know, the sun coming up. So really, the simpler, the better. Like if you can appreciate the most simple things in life. It's kind of like when you are with a kid and they see a caterpillar, you know, or they see I remember seeing a train with our oldest son for the first time, and it's like mind blown, you know, just like watching this train, it's like just in awe of this experience. Like if you can approach the world like a child with this sort of wonder and appreciation and gratitude, this is where your mind will change. So what's really amazing about gratitude and appreciation is that it's neurobiologically impossible for you to feel anxiety and appreciation at the same time. Like your brain cannot house both of those feelings. It's neurobiologically impossible for your brain to feel anger and appreciation at the same time. So if you are stuck in those places, this is your answer. This is literally your drug-free, you know, money-free, accessible answer. And that's what's so amazing. So how you do appreciation well is that you flood your brain with it. This isn't just a cognitive list of like, okay, fine, I'm grateful for my house, I'm grateful I'm alive, like I'm grateful for my job, even though I hate it. It's not that, okay? This is about you closing your eyes and going back to moments in your life where you were on your knees with gratitude. Whether it is a diagnosis that went your way, whether it's the birth of your children, whether it's some sort of aha moment, whether it's some sort of thing that happened that was pure grace, You go back there in your brain and you feel it and you let that flood your brain, and you will have a different quality of life. Once again, this is free. This is, this is what God, this is in the Bible so much, and that's what I always find fascinating about researching psychological principles, is that they all go back to the Bible. Like, this is in the Bible to give thanks always and things like that. And then when we find that science agrees and we're like, oh, okay, but it's been there all along. But that's what's so amazing about it, is that if you can have this in your brain, there's no room for anything else. So if you are spiraling into expectations and frustration and resentment and all of the things that are missing, step on back, throw in some gratitude, and hopefully you'll have a different outcome. So the other thing too is, if you always focus on what's missing, that's, especially for high achievers, that's our, what can I improve? What are my areas of growth? That's going to be one thing that you always focus on, and you'll always find something. But if you focus on what you have already, this is true joy, and this is true gratitude. And this is, once again, this is just a perspective change. So there's a few things. There's been some studies about journaling. College students with anxiety journaled about what they were grateful for, and there was a significant reduction in their anxiety. And then it's also been found to be inversely related to PTSD. So they did a study measuring PTSD in veterans, and the higher the levels of gratitude, the lower the levels of PTSD. So the other thing too is, once again, just make it a habit for yourself. Make it a habit in your family. We do this with our kids. We talk about this every night. We do a happy, sad, worried, grateful every night, just as part of our routine. And if they're too tired and they don't want to do all of those, then they just do a grateful. What were you grateful for today? And I just think incorporating that into your life changes your life. Because we can always find what's missing. We can always find what's wrong. We can always find how people and ourselves and the government and our bosses have disappointed us. But if you can really switch gears and feel it, like I said, find ways to feel it. And the simpler, the better. The simpler, I don't know, I feel like once I learned this knowledge, I started applying it into my everyday life. And there's this concept called habit stacking. So if you kind of do something new with something that you already do, it's much easier to make it sustainable. So I walk to work every day, and I usually take the same route. And it's like I hit this certain spot, and then I just start thinking about what I'm grateful for. And that happens every single day. And it just becomes automatic. And I think a lot of our thoughts become automatic, and a lot of our thoughts kind of become automatic, and what are all the ways that we're mad, or what are all the ways we've screwed up? But if it can become automatic in this direction, that's where I feel like that's where all the joy is. What time is it? It's 11. Okay, I'll wrap it up. I know that this was kind of marketed as an hour-long presentation. So just give me a few more minutes, and then I'll have time for questions, and I'll stick around too. All right, I think this is our last detriment. Okay. The last detriment that we have is just living in autopilot. So this is just living and putting out fires as they come and reacting to problems and just having curveball after curveball hit us. Bad news, this problem, this mandate, this, policy, this other issue, this thing with our kids. It's just living in autopilot. And what we found, once again, is that we're having huge increases in stress and anxiety and depression, especially among younger people. And I think a lot of times we don't do feelings well. We don't like them. We don't like bad ones. We don't want to feel them. They seem inconvenient. A lot of times we're critical for how we feel. And some of these come from childhood, you're too sensitive, you're fine, you're overreacting, kind of those damaging messages about feelings. And I think what a lot of my clients talk about is that they just build. You can't numb your feelings, you don't make them go away. What do they say? What you resist persists. So the more that you try to avoid them, the bigger they come. And you all know this because you've all tried it. And a lot of times they build to the point of lashing out irritability, breaking down, crying, anxiety attack, they stay there. So living in autopilot and not addressing feelings is another detriment. And this is where our second to last strategy comes in, and just intentional self-awareness. So really taking some time to just check in. How are you feeling? What's going on for you? And to not run from the hard feelings, to not say, nope, this is negative, or this is bad, or I shouldn't feel like this. It's okay that you feel like that. There's no one who says you shouldn't feel like that. It's okay. However you feel is okay. That we need to address and honor and listen to our feelings, because like I said, they're guides. Another really good strategy that's been helpful for me is that there's this psychologist out of Harvard named Susan David. And what she says is that when you check in, say to yourself, I'm noticing this thought, or I'm noticing this feeling, okay? Because then you don't say, oh, I'm worthless, I always screw things up. Or, why does this always happen? No one cares about me. Instead of that, which feels true then, and that's your reality, and that's how it is, if you say, I'm noticing this thought, I'm noticing this feeling, this gives you enough space to realize that it is just a thought, and it is just a feeling. We have hundreds that come into our awareness throughout the day. I'm noticing the thought that you don't care about me. I'm having a feeling of hopelessness because everyone is crazy around me, right? And this fabric of society is coming undone, and all of these other things. But once again, I think when we have thoughts and feelings, they feel true, they feel unending, they feel like a prison. So if you can just have that slight nuance, and this is what I'm noticing, and it's a thought, it's a feeling, it's a story, and that's what it is. She wrote a book that's called Emotional Agility. She also has a TED Talk, I think, as well, that I've watched recently, and that's been helpful. All right, she also talks about being as specific as you can when you identify how you feel, okay? So if you just say, I'm stressed, I'm stressed, I'm stressed, that's one thing. But if you can kind of dive into that a little bit better, you'll be able to respond in a different way. So if you say, I'm fearful, like I'm afraid for this, or I'm just feeling really depleted right now, I'm feeling exhausted. If you can kind of dig into what stress is feeling like, it sends a different message to your brain. Depleted is different than fearful, right? So the more specific, the better. And if you can really get some language attached to it, that's where it's powerful. The other thing, too, is to cope with your primary feeling. If you're feeling anxious, sometimes you're like, why do I feel anxious? Am I going to feel anxious again? Is this going to happen? Am I going to panic? Or why do I always feel like this? I can never snap out of it. So we start to have feelings about our feelings. And this is when it can really build and snowball. So if you're feeling anxious, cope with your anxiety. It's okay to feel that way. It's okay. What do you need? What will help you feel better? What is your body guiding you towards? What are ways that you can feel peace right now or feel calm? So cope with the first one and watch for that snowball. Okay, and then changing your state. This is what I talked about as a barrier. We all have the power to do this. We communicate to ourselves when we're anxious, when we're angry, by how we position our body, how we hold our face, how we breathe, right? If you're anxious, your breath becomes shallow and faster and contracted. So, and also what we focus on, right? If you focus on everything you can't control, everything that's missing, all of the problems, that's going to communicate a lot of fear and anxiety. So you can change your state, and we do this all the time, kind of automatically, but in how you position your body, right? If you're like, yeah, that communicates some power and some excitement. And if you think about athletes, we do this with music, certain pump-up songs. We do this with Mozart. We do this with Bob Marley, whatever else, whatever state you want, you have a playlist for, I'm guessing. So we all do this, but really looking at how you hold your physiology. Sometimes if you just jump up and down, right? Like usually I do that before my presentations. It's weird. People don't see it. But to get yourself in a certain state, you communicate that to your body. And there's been a lot of research on this. So, use this information in your environment as well. If your environment is chaos, if your environment is overwhelming, if it's messy and cluttered, clean it and light a nice candle and put on some nice music. And if you go to a Veda, if you go to a salon, it is quiet and it smells good and the lights are low. Who says you can't do that at your house, right? So all of this impacts how we feel. And then the other part of this, and I have one more strategy after this, is just somehow prime yourself every day. So if you wake up and the first thing that you do is check your phone and check your email, check your news feed in bed, you are going to operate at a deficit for the rest of your day. That's like opening up your doors, for me, to all of my students and clients and their problems and questions while I'm still lying in my bed, okay? So what you can do instead is have a beautiful piece of artwork or fresh flowers or a photo of people that you love or just nothing on your dresser. And, saying a prayer, saying a phrase, just taking a deep breath, saying something really simple is going to help you start off with some resources. And like I said, if you can have any sort of ritual every day, and if you have kids, wake up before them. I cannot say this enough. Even if it's 5 minutes, don't have your kids wake you up. That is a totally different feel to your day starting than if you're up before them. Except for if you have a baby, then you're immune from this. But anything that you can do to just say a prayer, to do some sort of gratitude practice, that's what a lot of entrepreneurs and billionaires and high performers do, is a gratitude practice. This science is used for a lot of successful people. So whether it's 3 things you're grateful for, thinking of a moment in time. Sometimes what I do is I just go through each family member in my family and I just pray for them and just think of what they're struggling with, think of what I'm grateful for, and then just set an intention for yourself. A lot of times if you're just what do I want to get out of today? Do I just want to be really present? Do I want to be really grateful? Do I just want to be really curious? Do I want to be a really good listener? And if you can kind of set a clear intention like that, it's fun to do. It's fun to kind of see how your perspective changes. Okay, this is my last one, and I know we're a little bit over time. Service. A lot of times when we suffer, it's because we are in our own pain. We're aware of our own pain. We're in ourselves. We're self-focused. But if you can really look at how you can impact the world, how you can give to others in a very non-reciprocal way, okay? This isn't I scratch your back, you scratch mine. So I love that first quote that says, plant trees under whose shade you do not plan to sit. So this is about you doing good for the world. And they say that the highest purpose is to live in service. And selflessness is really, it feels good, right? If you give someone a meal, if you snow blow out their driveway, if you support someone who's struggling, it feels good for you. And these are kind of all of the ways that selflessness and service feel good. And they say to serve the pain that you know the best, okay? So like I said, I work with students who work with people with addiction, and a lot of my students are in recovery themselves because they've lost and had tragedy and had so much struggle, and they know that pain. So they use that to become a counselor to help other people. And, the 12 steps of AA, I think one of the most powerful reasons why that works is because the last step is go, share your story, help other people, spread this message, go sponsor other people, go serve this pain, because then it makes your pain matter in a different way. It gives it a new meaning. So these are all the ways. And if you can do this with your kids, if you can do this with your family, I love doing this with my kids, just fun ways that we can give back to the community. Sometimes we do giving days. We'll make donuts. We have a deep fryer, so we'll make donuts and deliver them to friends and my parents. And it's just really getting it not on ourselves, because I feel like especially kids can be kind of self-focused. All right, so kind of in closing, this takes a decision. So knowledge is not power. like execution is power. So the most power you'll get out of today is what you do with it. So use this information to make some decisions about how you want to change your life. And make it a must. Like, this isn't a should that we should take care of ourselves anymore. And again, if you think about how you feel, like how proud you'll feel, how much more energy and clarity you'll have, and keep it really simple. Whatever you're planning, whatever you're thinking about, there's Ariana Huffington, she left Huffington Post and now has this company called Thrive Global. And they do this thing called micro habits, where they just make really, really, really simple changes. And they say, make it so simple it's impossible to fail, okay? And if you fail, then it's too difficult, so make it even simpler. So if you're trying to think about taking action, make it so simple that you cannot fail. If it is putting out your running shoes, if it is putting out your devotion book, complexity is the enemy of execution, so keep it super simple. The other thing, too, is your why. Why do you do any of this? And that is what should drive us, right? Is like, we do this because we matter and our lives matter. And if we are joyful and peaceful and excited and calm and certain and kind of beacons of hope, that's when our kids are healthier, our kids are safer. That's when our communities and our families are supported, and that's when the work of the church can grow and thrive. So that's why all this matters. Again, it's kind of about all of the work that we do. All right, so just kind of thinking about, again, how you're going to apply this. And I love hearing what people come up with, because it's such different things to the different groups that I've led. But just thinking about, how do you want to, whether it's cultivating more gratitude, whether it's cultivating more service, whether it's managing your expectations about other people in your family, whether it is, complaining less and hopefully asking better questions. Really think about how you'll use this information and improve your life, improve your joy, improve your peace, improve your playfulness, right? All of the things that we want more of. And I can share this with Pastor Hendricks as well, if you feel like you have to frantically remember this. So once again, all of this matters, because when our cups are full, that's when we have this abundance that we can share with others. We don't want to be operating out of an empty cup. So once again, you guys, thank you so much for your time and attention. Thank you to the church and Pastor Hendricks for investing in these topics and these workshops. I think this is a great investment, and I think, like I said, supporting Christians and helping Christians thrive is such an awesome blessing and such a great focus, because a lot of people are struggling. So I'll leave my email if you want to reach out at all. I'm in Minnesota. I'm in Mankato. But I'm happy to connect via email if you have any questions, even about Christian Family Solutions. We are busier than ever in our company's history. But we partner with 600 organizations, ELS and WELS, and other Christians across the world. So we're a pretty awesome company. But just reach out if you want to connect at all. And with that, we'll end it. So thank you again. And I can stick around for questions or comments. And help yourself to food as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. There's so many parallels to Scripture and how we do things as a church. Luther suggested that it's in our catechism to begin every day in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And that's a way to set your state, to tell yourself a story of who you are, right? You are God's own child, and through the Trinity, God does give you an overflowing cup. So thank you so much again for your presentation, and please ask questions or take food. We've got plenty.
Does anyone have any questions at all? And otherwise, I can hang out up here too if you want to talk after. Yeah.
There's good stress and bad stress. Can you expound on that?
Sure. Yeah, there's been a lot of research as to how we perceive stress, and the stress that we perceive it as bad is really damaging. But if you can notice your body's activation to stress and use it as a motivation, or say okay, what this means is that I'm ready for action right now. It's all about kind of the meaning but there's a really good TED Talk on that called How to Make Stress Your Friend. And basically, if you perceive stress is bad, you're much likely to have more damaging effects of it. But if you perceive it as necessary or as activation or as helpful, then it motivates you. But it's really about what it means to you. So, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Because it is like, you know, your body's activation. If you're like, oh my gosh, no, I'm panicking. Or if you're like, okay, I'm ready to go, right? Like I'm ready to do this presentation, or I'm ready to take some action here. I'm ready to get out of my comfort zone. Then it can be really motivating and helpful. Yeah. Any other questions?
This is going to be like a monthly type of thing, is it? Or
We're all making a monthly thing. Yep, so different speakers. I've got one lined up already for, what is it? It's April now. So I've got somebody lined up for June, and I'm working on somebody for May. So hopefully a monthly thing.
I was thinking we're just going to keep having her. How do you learn? I have a baby shower at noon, so how do you learn to prioritize? That's my husband's biggest gripe about me, is because I've got too many irons in the fire all the time.
Sure.
And prioritizing, and I have to say my family usually falls lower on the list because I'm doing a lot of other service projects.
Sure.
I write lists to try to keep me on track, but prioritizing to me is very difficult. Well, I should say that. Prioritizing my home life from everything else is
Sure. Well, I mean, I think it's really about being clear on your values too, and I think it can ebb and flow, right? Like if it's if you have an event coming up, then I'm guessing that would take priority. If you have a sick child, you know, that might take priority too. But ultimately, I think it's, you know, your faith and then your family and then, you know, other things that matter. And like I said, that just kind of ebbs and flows with seasons. And I don't know, maybe it is too about, you know, doing some reflection or some journaling or assessing kind of where people are and really kind of being in line with your values. That's the best thing that I can say. And making, you know, talking a lot with your significant other too about like, okay, like here's what I have coming up. What do you need from me? Like how can you feel cherished during this time?
he wants a clean house.
You're fine.
I'm like, you're working from home, I still love you.
Because that, I mean, they always talk about work-life integration, and that really does, you know, like for me, it's finals week coming up at the university, so my husband might need to pick up with you know, cleaning and cooking a little bit more, but once another season hits, then I'll have more time, so it's always kind of an integration, I guess. And clean house, that's kind of you know, a reoccurring conflict, I'm guessing. Who does what, and what's the lowest level of, what can you get away with and is still doable? Oh man, any other questions at all? Yeah.
Will we be able to see the slides somewhere?
Sure. Yep, I shared it with Pastor Hendricks before the presentation, and you can feel free to use it and share it and do whatever you want with it.
Is there, like, what would you say is a good way to share some of the, like, you talked about, like, when people are complaining, maybe asking them, like, better questions, or, I don't know, because I feel like I'm a certain way down this journey, and there's a lot of people in my life that are really struggling. Like, what's the best way to help them to do some of these things?
Sure. Well, I think kind of listening and like joining them in that, and like having the courage to like feel what that must feel like, which is hard. And a lot of times it's like such an obvious solution, but like as a counselor, we never give solutions. It's really about helping have empathy and really understand it, and then the clients, you know, can come up with it. So,
Do you find it hard? Like, I find when someone else is feeling something, then I start to feel that thing. So it's hard for me to listen to somebody because I start to feel like
sure, yeah.
anxious or depressed or.
Yeah, yeah, and that's where it's really having boundaries too. Like if they need a counselor to talk about it with, because you shouldn't be anyone's counselor. And that, you know, this presentation was birthed out of that, and my students were all kind of feeling that too, of like we need some resources so you don't get burned out, because it is a lot to carry other people's burdens. So, and if your mental health and if you're stressed, like if you are feeling upset, like that's where it is setting some boundaries too, of like this, because it's not like you can just listen all the time and get kind of dumped on and then like feel overwhelmed by their feelings, because that's, you'll burn out then, and you'll avoid them and, you know, try to protect yourself in a way. So it's listening and kind of giving what you can, and then, you know, redirecting or referring. That happened to me. I was an RA in college, and all my people would come in and tell me their problems like till late at night, and it's like you just can't, you don't have unlimited resources to give other people. So kind of finding ways to set those boundaries too.
So when you do counseling, even virtually, do you do someone as young as 13 years old?
Oh yeah, yep. There's play therapy. There's therapy for kids who can't talk yet. I don't do that. My youngest is 12, but there's definitely kid therapists and play therapists
And because it's virtual, you would do it out of state. There's no.
yeah, we have contracts with different churches around the world.
Okay.
So it's funded usually through the church, and then congregation members can reimburse the church after a certain number of sessions. But yeah, if you can get someone who's licensed in that state, you can use insurance. But if it's with the member assistance program, it can be across state lines. I work with clients all over the country. So yeah, it's awesome.
And you know, years ago, I was struggling with my own feelings and depression a little bit, and my clinic happened to have a new opportunity where you could talk to someone available to you, kind of a counselor. I was hesitant because I'm a Christian. I thought, well, I don't want, you know, counselors, you know, how can they help you if they're not a Christian? But ironically, in this conversation with this young man, he's not allowed to professionally, you know, in his setting, but he was a Christian. Anyway, he's just recently heard a paper that he'd gone to a conference for, and he gave me 2 words from the paper. I'll share them, and they turned out to be my words. They were rumination and avoidance. And it was interesting because it ended up helping me, because he gave me words that define pieces of what I deal with. And then when I started to see it in my life, I'd say, oh, those are those 2 words, and then I could tackle it. So that was an interesting thing for me. He identified something that my patterns, and once they were identified, I could work on it.
Yeah, I think that's so
I'm
powerful.
not cured, but
I think it's powerful though, because then it's not like you feel crazy and like
Yeah.
feel like obsessing or thinking about things all the time. It's like, oh, I'm ruminating, I'm doing that,
yeah.
I'm focusing on that, and that is, it's like what you can. Well, they